Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is going to be the second event of our July 2020 webinar series that's being hosted by the Utah Government Finance Officers Association. My name's Kimberly Roosh, and I am the Administrative Services Director for Washington City and the current president for UGFOA. So I'm grateful today to have this opportunity to have Jeremy and Seth with us from the Office of the State Auditor and for their willingness to prepare this presentation. Now, before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded and will be made available next week on the UGFOA website, along with any slide materials from today. The session's worth 1.5 CPE, and there will be 3 polling questions that you'll need to participate in as well as completing the post-webinar survey in order to qualify for your CPE. So please take a minute to familiarize yourself with the attendee icons in the Zoom banner. Questions throughout the presentation can be submitted by raising your hand and waiting to be called on, or in writing using the Q&A icon. If you have any technical issues that arise, please submit those questions in the chat. And then the poll. So when the poll is administered, depending on how your setups are, it may be a pop-up. So you might want to just check and make sure you don't have any pop-up blockers that are enabled so that you don't miss out on that. But if there are any issues that come up and you're concerned about missing that for your CPE, just send me a message in the chat and then I'll make note for you. Okay, now without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers. Jeremy Walker is the manager of the local government division for the State Auditor's Office. He is a CPA with a bachelor's and master's degree in accounting from Southern Utah University. He started his career as an auditor in the Las Vegas office of Arthur Anderson and has since served as the finance director at Grantsville City and as the Tooele County Treasurer. So in addition to leading the local government team, Jeremy spends a lot of time clarifying legal requirements and providing a sounding board for elected officials and finance officers and local governments throughout the state. And I can attest to that too. Jeremy has been a great resource for me to reach out to when needed. Our other presenter today is Seth Oveson, and he's the supervisor of the local government division for the State Auditor's Office. Seth earned a Master's of Accountancy at Southern Utah University in Cedar City, Utah. And while attending school, he met his wife, Melanie, and he has 6 children and currently lives in Cedar City, where he stays busy enjoying gardening, nature, and supporting his children in a variety of activities. Seth's years of experience in public accounting, as well as being a county auditor for 5 years, help him to see issues from different points of view. He is pursuing a PhD in business administration with an emphasis in accounting through North Central University and is passionate about helping local governments improve and serve their citizens more effectively. So thanks, Seth and Jeremy, again for being here, and I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Kim. It's always good to be with you guys. Today, we want to discuss kind of an overview of what we're going to cover today. The first thing is, since last year, we've done a couple of different things. The first is the Resource Center on our website. And I'll show you the tab with the link for that in just a second. We've also created a basic and intermediate financial compliance training, which is also available on the State Auditor's website. That's a good resource for if you have a new person in your organization, a new clerk, a new accountant that you've just hired, and they need to become familiar with some of the compliance reporting and or governmental accounting. Jeremy will walk through those later on in our presentation. Also, we have a couple of new auditor alerts. Back in January, February, we had an auditor alert about the new fraud risk assessment. And then we've provided another auditor alert on COVID-19 and the transparency reporting, which Jeremy will cover. And coming this year, we have a couple of new things. The annual fraud risk assessment. So if you're a fiscal year entity, hopefully you're already familiar with that. We'll cover those in the slides to come. We also have the auditor independence monitoring. So if your external auditor is helping you prepare your financial statements, we're requiring a couple of new documents to be submitted to our office. That goes in line with the new Yellow Book standards. And Jeremy will also cover the Transparent Utah upgrades. It's got a new look, it's faster, has a couple of different things and functionalities that should be able to help you guys do your job a little bit better. And I will also cover some of the new Gatsby standards. We have a couple of Gatsby standards which have been postponed because of COVID-19, and we've got a couple that we're in the works of creating a new auditor alert because we've seen some non-compliance. One of the things that I wanted to show was our local government resource center. If you can see that, Jeremy, if you could flip to the next slide. This is a website that we have put together in the last couple of years, and we're trying to feed it with good content for everyone. There's a couple of new videos and a checklist on capital projects funds if you're working with smaller entities that have problems with fund balance, or how to move those funds into a capital projects fund. We've also created a fraud risk assessment checklist, which is out there, but we've added to it a preparation checklist. So you can go through, download that. The preparation checklist is so that you can go through, get everything together that you're going to need. And then we have, like I said before, all of those training videos on YouTube. I want to cover the state compliance guide. A lot of the different entities have, if you have an audit, your auditor is going to go through that. And it's always good to know what it is that your auditor is going to be asking you about so you can be prepared. In the compliance guide this year, we've had a couple of changes, a restructuring of several things. One of those ones is if you deal with a justice court. If you're a city or a county and you have a justice court, we've simplified those procedures, where before the external auditors would come in and they would look at voided transactions, adjustments to different accounts. They're still going to come in, they're still going to look at the separation of duties. And we've tried to have a correlation between the AOC, Administrative Office of the Courts, and our office and the CPA community, where the AOC before was coming in and they were looking at the separation of duties, and they were using one template, one set of guidelines that they had developed, and the CPAs were using whatever they had developed. And sometimes what would result would be the AOC would come in, they would have findings, but your external auditors would say everything looks okay, or vice versa, where the external auditors would say, hey, there's a problem here, and the AOC would say, well, they're okay. And we've tried to coordinate those so they're using the same checklists, which should be good. But if you have questions on that one, they're also going to test a couple of different categories that the AOC has identified as being problematic this year. So they're simpler procedures, but they're more targeted toward those problem areas that the AOC has identified. We've restructured everything. So if you are a city or a town, county, or a special service district, all of the procedures for schools have been moved into Chapter 3. So if you're trying to look at the guide that's out on our website, and it's available at that link at the bottom of the slide, the resources.auditor.utah.gov, you can ignore Chapter 3 if you're not an LEA. If you're working with a school district or a charter school, Chapter 3 applies to you, and you'll want to take a look at those procedures. But instead of having the school procedures sprinkled throughout the guide and you guys having to skip sections, we've tried to move those all into Chapter 3 so you won't have to pay attention to those. The other one is the annual fraud risk assessment. This is an initiative to help the different entities in the state to analyze where you're at as far as for the risk of fraud. And in the state compliance guide, the procedure that has been added there is that the auditors will come in and they will look in the minutes when they're reviewing your minutes, and they will make sure that, one, the fraud risk assessment was performed, and two, that it was discussed in a meeting. So if you're a town recorder and you're dealing with the finances and helping out with the minutes, make sure that when that fraud risk assessment is discussed, that it's listed on the agenda and it's easy for the auditors to find that, you know, on this specific date, we discussed our fraud risk assessment. They're going to look for one time when it's discussed. It's very possible and hopeful that the governing body will look at things, they'll go through the fraud risk assessment, they'll identify a couple of things that they would like to improve, and that conversation trickles into more than one meeting and it's discussed routinely throughout the year as things are changed or policies are updated. but they will be looking for at least one time when the fraud risk assessment was identified. The other thing in the state compliance guide is the 3-day rule for cash management. Several years ago, auditors were asked to specifically test that 3-day deposit rule. And we had a good period of time where there were no findings. That was backed off. And so they weren't testing for that for a few years. And we've had a resurgence of that being an issue coming up in different audits that we've looked at. And so we've added that back in. So when they test cash management, they're not just going to test the deposit investment report, but they're also going to check cash for those deposits and make sure that they're being deposited within 3 days. And I know I mentioned before, if there are questions, if questions are coming up as we go through these, we're going to try to move a little bit faster through just the presentation portion. So if you have questions, raise your hand and we'll take care of those. So we have received a lot of questions in the last couple of days on the fraud risk assessment. Okay, we put that out there. We had a period of time for questions. We've got lots of good input from different entities. We've tried to address as many of those concerns as possible. So here are the key takeaways of where we're at. It was originally discussed that it would be part of the state compliance guide and that the external auditors would go through this risk assessment because they do a risk assessment anyway. But through the discussion, we felt like it was more important for that to be done by the entity. So it could be a self-assessment. It was not be included in the state compliance audit guide, except for being just that we were going to test the meeting itself. It must be presented to the board by the end of the year. And by the end of the year, it's by the end of its fiscal year. So if you are a December 31st, 2020 entity year end, you have until December 31st of 2020 to complete the assessment and talk about it in a board meeting. And then you'll have, like all of the other reports that are uploaded to our office, you have an additional 180 days to get it submitted in, although we'd encourage you to submit it as soon as you have it done. Looks like we've got a question in there on the question was, has there been any discussion on asking for a modification during the pandemic times for the 3-day rule? There has been discussion, although the statute has not been changed. There's been some discussion, and the Treasury, Jeremy in the Treasurer's office put out some guidelines on the COVID-19 3-day deposit.
So my understanding is you can request for your entity, you can request a exemption from the state treasurer, and he has granted at least one that I'm aware of. So it's going to be handled on a case-by-case basis. So get a hold of the state treasurer's office if that's something that you need in your organization.
Yeah. And I know I've received a couple of phone calls on that with regard to, well, we want to quarantine the money, have it put in a Dropbox and let it sit for a couple of days before they do that one. It's 3 business days. So that is one thing that you'll have to talk with the state treasurer about. Back to our fraud risk assessment. The one sheet is what we need submitted to us. So if you look at the fraud risk assessment from our website, there is an implementation guide. There's the checklist of things to pull together for you to get ready to do it. And then there is the actual questionnaire. The questionnaire is a one sheet, and it has the questions and it has the scoring for it, what those points are allocated for. That is all that needs to be submitted to our office. So we've had several questions of people coming in and saying, hey, do we need to submit all of the policies that you asked for? You said, do we have this policy? Do we need to put all the policies with it? And the answer is no. We don't want all of the policies uploaded. We just want the one questionnaire sheet. The going through the policies and checking them and everything else, that is the job for the entity to go through and make sure that they've got all those in case in place. And the implementation guide will talk about each of those questions, and they will talk about each of the policies. And in there are some key items that, hey, if you have a conflict of interest policy, these are the key items that we would expect it to address. So you can look through those and improve your policies as you're doing it. But as far as for the points, the question is, do you have one? Is it in place in the audit period that we're talking about?
Seth, and can I jump in? We do want the entities to have, and we will be coming out and verifying the results of a sample of those that will be submitted. So you will need to have that information available to verify the results that were reported by the entity, but it's not to be submitted. So just to clarify that we do want it available and together preferably.
Yeah. And with this fraud risk assessment, we've had several questions on, well, how is it going to be used? And
Well, it looks like we might have lost Seth. You mentioned they were having some.
hopefully this is,
Oh, there you go.
I was muted. I don't know if you intended to mute me.
So you blacked out there for a minute. So you were saying what it's going to be used for.
Okay. So what we intend to use it for, the most important use of the fraud risk assessment will be done by the entity. It's a chance for you to go through and look at your own policies, look at your own procedures, involve the governing body who gets the ultimate say on whether or not something gets implemented or not, and try to get everybody in the entity on the same page as far as improving the controls within the entity and make them aware. And that's the most important use that I see from the fraud risk assessment. Yes, we are collecting the data, and yes, we're hosting all of that, and we've made it a required report so that people will actually make sure they get it done, and it will become more of a priority on their list. But the most important use of this will be done by you. So I want to talk about, this is the changing of the revised scoring that we've done. So originally, the scores are on the far left column, how it was originally done. After receiving feedback, we tried to standardize it more. We had a lot of feedback of saying, who is to say that the training should be worth less than a pledge or whatever. And so we tried to standardize them so it's more a buffet style thing. Here's a group of policies, they're all worth the same. You can choose what is most applicable and what is best to implement for you. There's a section for other practices, internal control related and other practices. Well, those are all worth the same scoring, so you can choose from that what would be best for your entity. Separation of duties is still the most important one there at the top. That separation of duties we believe is key. Research and our experience doing audits and tracking fraud cases support that. And we'll go through the scoring there. This is how the scoring was set before the 2019 scoring. This is where we're at now. So basically, if you got 92%, which would be, if you're familiar, we all went through school, 92%, that's an A grade that would be considered very low. 82 up to 92 would be low, similar to a B grade. 72 to 80s, that would be a C. A D would be like 52 to 72%, which would be considered a high risk entity, and anything less than 52% would be considered very high. There was some debate about whether or not, you should include the scoring and things like that. There is, if you're familiar with your governing bodies, at least the different governing bodies that I've worked with over time, a lot of council members, commissioners, board members, until it's put in terms of something familiar that they're familiar with, like a an A, B, C type scoring matrix, then they don't see a problem with it. And that's part of the reason why this scoring exists, is so that we can say, okay, if I'm a governing body and I show that my entity is a high risk entity, I'm not going to like it. I'm going to look at the different options of what I have, how I can improve, and they will make a natural migration towards working towards being a moderate or low or very low risk entity. So I don't see any questions popping up on that yet. So let's talk about Gatsby for a minute. So in 2020 with the COVID-19, 2 out of the 3 of these have received an extension of time for implementation. And those are Gatsby 84 and Gatsby 87. Gatsby 84 deals with fiduciary activities. Gatsby 87 are for leases. And that delayed implementation is December 15th, 2020. So if you're a city, fiscal year June 30th, year end, it was going to be implemented December 15th of 2019. And so you may have already done some work on this. If you've already done it and you already have everything in place, early implementation is encouraged. But if COVID-19 caught you mid-implementation, you were diverted your efforts to other things, you have until this next year to implement those 2. The other that's on here is Gatsby 77, which we do not have official guidance out on this, but it is something that has been reported to us, and we've been doing some digging, and we're preparing an auditor alert that will talk about tax abatements. So that's one that you can wait on pins and needles to see what's coming through on that. But as a precursor for that, it does deal with community reinvestment areas, or CDAs, CRAs, and how some of the activities that they may do when you have a CDA, it could trigger Gatsby 77, and you may have additional reporting requirements if your entity participates in one of those agreements. So looks like we've got our first polling question that's been launched. Hopefully, with the introduction that we've already gone through, should be a simple polling question. Remember, for CPE, you have to participate in polls, so get that answered, and we'll go through it. And I'll pause for just a second. With regard to Gatsby 87 and leases, we've put out a training video on our website, and it goes through, we go through fairly quickly, but the different ways that Gatsby 87 applies. And if you're a bigger entity, the thing that you need to know, and it's kind of tricky on that one, is with leases, governmental entities could be a leasee or a leaseor, depending on what you do. If you have an airport and you're leasing hangar space or something to somebody, you could be on one side of the table. But if you're leasing heavy equipment or whatever for your road shop, you could be on the other side of that. And so both, you have to learn how to account for leases from both directions, which some of the smaller entities, you may only have the one side. But that training video is available on our website. Fiduciary activities involve several things. The most common is probably the bail trust. If you have a justice court and you're holding funds in trust, if you're holding agency funds, like sometimes building departments will hold a bond that you're holding for them. Justice courts are the other one that holds bail. Jails, if you have an inmate commissary account, anytime you're holding those funds for another person or entity. Counties have a very large one when they're collecting all of the taxes for the different entities, and then they distribute those out. Those are fiduciary activities, and there's additional reporting requirements for those. So we're publishing and trying to get trainings out for each of those as you're implementing them throughout the year. An important thing is that you read through the standards watch the training videos and become familiar enough with the issues so that you can do those ones. Leases are particularly interesting. Your entity should identify all of those leases before your auditor gets there. And you should make the determination of what the period of the lease is and stuff like that, so that your external auditors come in, they can look at it and test your work and see if they agree. But too often what we see is on some of these standards, the entity comes in and says, well, our auditor told us that we needed to pick up the lease. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be, you've determined what the lease is, you determine whether or not it needs to be on the books, and your auditor should just check whether or not you did it correctly. So, and that is where I've gotten to so far. I've got one question here. That's that one. Good. On that polling question, the question said, who needs to certify the fraud risk assessment? Your choices were the chief administrative officer, the chief financial officer, or both. 88% of you caught that. It is both. Both the chief financial officer and the chief administrative officer should certify that. There's a line for 2 signatures on the bottom of that fraud risk assessment. So awesome. And we really do want to be able to kind of cover those things. Jeremy's going to go from here and talk about some of the other issues. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have questions as we go through the next section, which is some of the things that have just barely been implemented. You good?
Okay, thanks, Seth. So what Seth covered was a high-level overview of our complete training that is available on our YouTube site, and I will get to that in a minute and show you where that's at. But I wanted to start by reminding you about our Resource Center website. A lot of the questions that we get, the answers to those questions are available on this page. And I'll go here to the training portion of our Resource Center. And this first section, one of the common questions we've gotten in the last 3 or 4 months are related to the training that board members should be taking to get the points on the fraud risk assessment. And this part right here answers that question depending on the type of entity you have. If you go to this link, our other website, the training website, we have, this is through a credentialed training platform. So municipal officials, then what's behind here is essentially the same videos, the same trainings. They're just slightly altered for the individual, like school boards, municipalities, counties, and then of course our nonprofit, governmental nonprofit board training, and then the one that's required for local and special district board members is a little bit more comprehensive. But all these, if they sign up through this training.auditor.utah.gov, they will be asked questions and they will be issued a certificate for completing that, and that will be tracked in our systems as well. So that's, we wanted to bring your attention, bring your focus there, that there are certificates, and this is the, depending on the type of entity you are, is where that training will be available to them and how they can get to it. Also wanted to remind you that we have put up our 2020 reporting requirements manual, and this is a PDF. We used to have almost 10 different PDFs for different entities of different sizes, and we've consolidated that into one more a single document that I think organizes it a little bit better. So that's available here. Our approved vendor list, if you're looking for bookkeeping or CPA firm to help with your organization, we have vetted those and have a state contract for that. And you can get the link or the document, PDF document that contains their contact information here. And then as you go down through this forms, We have the different certificate templates and uniform chart of accounts, uniform accounting manual, the compliance guide in its different sections, agreed upon procedures, and at the very bottom is the auditor alert list. So our most recent 2020-02, the CARES Act fund requirement for those getting money from the state. And then back in January, the auditor annual fraud risk assessment requirement. So we have all of our auditor alerts listed here. And again, this was under forms, manuals, and guides. The checklists, I think Seth mentioned that we have added a couple of checklists or fraud risk assessment documents, just the questionnaire, the implementation guide, and the checklist are all available here.
And Jeremy,
yes.
We got a question on here about does the USDA training meet the board member training requirements?
It depends. If my understanding is if our training is part of that training, yes, but I don't believe that they cover the financial part when we're not included. So they will often do open and public meetings training, which is an important and useful training, but that is not the required training. That's part of the larger required training, but when UASD does one that's just for open and public meetings, that is not the entirety of the required board member training.
Yeah, and if you've attended one of those, I've gone to several of them and team taught with LeGrand. If you go to one of those formats where UASD is there and they cover the first half or the last half, and our office is there, and we cover the board member training, and then they cover the other part. Those trainings would cover both, but if it's just them, it may not.
And we did put out that training on our website and worked with UASD so that for those that are not able to attend an in-person training, if they watch that video training from our site, that does qualify in its entirety. So they don't have to get a separate training from UASD. That what's on our website for our perspective contains the entirety of the required training.
Yeah, and that's on that training website as well.
Yeah. So the checklist, I was going to show the fraud stuff. The template policies are here. We have the brief explanations and checklists. And one that's been really hot topic with larger entities, so probably none of the ones you all work for, but a lot of smaller entities violate the maximum fund balance rule. And so this checklist helps them know how to use a capital projects fund. So that's new since last year. And then we have our, I wanted to show you to submit a question, this thing here. And if you'll use your reporting login, reporting website login. And so this is kind of an FAQ type thing. We want a topic selected, and this will be posted to a public forum. So we've had several people use that, but I don't know that we've really showed how to do that before. So ask a question there. And then if you have a question specific to your entity and you want to submit it this way, this will go to Calvin on our team, and he'll initiate a case based on what comes through here. So you can do a private individual question or one to the public format. And then we have a link to our videos. They're embedded within this page. So you don't necessarily have to go to the YouTube, but they're all here for your convenience. Links to our other auditor websites, back to our other platform, our fraud hotline site, and then the state reporting system. And also, just so you know, we have a keyword search function that's pretty powerful up here. If you don't want to have to navigate through these different menus, you can just type in a keyword search and hit search. It'll get you there also. But we wanted to show you a couple new features. So this is the state reporting site that many of you are familiar with. So we have, we kind of mentioned it a little bit, that we now have 2 CPA work papers that will need to be submitted when you have your you have an audit and the financial statements are prepared by the CPA as part of that audit. When those 2 conditions exist, we have 2 work papers that need to be submitted. I'll show you really quick, and we have these examples on our YouTube site also. So this is what that looks like here, is independence documentation and schedule of adjusting entries. So you could just upload them just to the site, just like you would the other any other reports, or your CPA can submit them as well. So I wanted to show from the reporting side, we have this new menu item here, the Transparent Utah icon. So the new upload site for transparency is now in, it's a Salesforce supported system. And so it's like a sister page to this financial reporting system. So it's just another side of that. And I'll show you that here in a second. But we do want to also updating contact information. That is something that's we really want to emphasize, is every time, every 6 months or however, if you've had changes in your board members or your staff, please go in here and update your information. So if you're in the state reporting system and you also want to get over to the Transparent Utah upload site, you just have to click this link here. And for those that may not have seen it, this is what that upload site looks like. It's obviously a different system than the previous one. So you're assigned to it, most of you are assigned to an entity, and that would be indicated here. But you can, by clicking this button, you can select any entity, put in some more keywords, and anything that matched that search will be available here. Since Seth and I are both SUU alum, we love SUU. You can go in here, and then as in the old system, you put in the total amount of the files total and the number of rows, and then go out and search for your document by clicking here, drag and dropping it into this little box, and then moving forward. And then, yeah,
Jeremy,
go ahead.
We got another question. Brandon asked if on the independence stuff, if there were no adjusting journal entries, proposed adjusting journal entries in their course of their audit, what do they do? And I believe the best thing that you do if the CPA firm is, if they're drafting your audit first, those are only required documents if the CPA firm is auditing and also drafting your financial statements. If they're doing that, then they would have to provide the independence documentation and the adjusting journal entries. If there were no adjusting journal entries, then you could just provide, I would just put a memo on there that said no adjusting journal entries were proposed and submit it. And then we'd know that they didn't make any adjustments to your books. You had it all clean beforehand and you're good to go. But it will ask for a document. So you will have to put in, if they are auditing your books and drafting the financial statements, it will ask for that document. So you just put in a memo that says no adjusting journal entries proposed by the CPA firm and submit that.
Yeah, that's actually a scenario I don't think we've considered because it's pretty rare, but I guess Brandon's just awesome and he just doesn't have any problems. So good job, Brandon. If there's any problems with that, though, they can just call us and we can remove that requirement.
Yeah. And we've got a follow-up question that's related to that as well. It said that they were told that a CPA firm doing the audit can no longer draft the financial statements. Is that not correct? And the answer to that is, in the new Yellow Book standards that has come out, the Yellow Book standards state that there is a automatically assumed threat to auditor independence if they are doing that. And they would have to then document why they can. So instead of before saying, you know what, the auditor is independent, we're going to assume the auditor is independent unless something comes up. Now, if they're drafting those financial statements and doing the audit, the assumption is that independence has been threatened, and they would need to document why it's okay that they're still doing that. So they definitely have raised the bar on that, but it is possible that a CPA firm can perform the audit and draft the financial statements, but they have to document why that's okay. And
that's what we're trying to look at, is because we have had some concerns about auditors doing too much work that would prevent them from being independent. So that's what we're going to be looking at.
Okay. We got picked up one more, Jeremy, and it says, number of rows is a new question right there on the screen that you're showing. It says, if we don't have that now, do we need to have our software now provide us with that information to upload?
So I don't know what it was called in the old system, the Utah Interactive created system, but it has always been a required number, the total amount, dollar figures, and the number of transactions or number of rows in the file. So maybe the word rows is different, but it's still the same requirement. Something that will help if you don't have that information available. It's going to be a little bit annoying, but you can just guess on what that number is. And then you'll get so I'm looking through here, you'll get a rejected status after you've uploaded it. And then if you click into the batch, like I'm doing here on the screen, it says right here, the error, total amount, and record count do not match. And if you look here under file information, it gives you what the user or you put in for both record count and net amount, and then what the system calculated. And so if you go and upload it again, the same file, and you just use these two numbers, it'll be right, because this is the system went through and calculated it. So unlike the old system where it just told you it was wrong, we actually provided through this error report what the right answer is. So we hope that that's, and it seems to be for those that have used it so far, to be able to actually see what the problems are if your file is rejected, that you can go in here and see the view error message. And then if it's this, the system calculated totals are available to you, and then you can just go and re-upload that with that new information. I saw one yesterday where they rounded to the whole dollar and the system had 41 cents. So sometimes it's just a matter of having an exact precise number, but that information is available to you here in this part of the new system.
Okay. And we got a comment. We call it number of rows now. It was called number of transactions in the old system. So
so that's slightly new verbiage, but there's kind of a workaround there. If your system doesn't provide that, you can upload it, get a rejection, and then go into the error report and see that number. We tried to get the most common issues with the old upload system. Obviously, the speed was the largest issue. Now, with a few exceptions, within a minute or two most, everybody's files are processed, and we think it's working really well. And if that's not the case, please send us a message and let us know offline so we can address that. The different status here in this dashboard, you can see the upload status. So if you're stuck in pending or validating, if you have a very large file, we will do that manually. So it may take a day or two for us to get that done. So it may be in the pending or validating process. And if you have any, we're looking at this pretty regularly. So if you have any issues that last more than a day or two, feel free to reach out to our team and give us a call, which of course you can get that information here on the contact us side. And so anyway, we're pretty pleased with the new site, the speed obviously being the key thing, but also the error messages to be able to figure out what's wrong with the file if it does get rejected.
Okay. Jeremy, I just want to remind everybody, we do have a polling question out there. So if you have us on one screen and you're ignoring us, there's still about 25% of the people in the thing that have not answered that polling question. So it's time to wake up and check the box and move on.
Okay, there they go. So the last thing is, again, when you're on the transparency upload site, again, it's a shared system, so you can click the state reporting system link and it'll take you back over, so you can just go back and forth with a click of a button. It's the same user ID and password sign in. So hopefully that's, we think that's a better system than the previous one. What are other questions? So Dave said, if you have to delete a previous file uploaded, you need to go to the old site. Good question, Dave. No. So you'll note that the previous system files, we have the file batch ID number. Anything with a B is things uploaded since last month, so in the new system. And anything with an A are the files that we brought over from the old system. So all those files from the old system are here, and they start with A. And the file name, the name that you gave that when you uploaded it, is here. So if you need another way to identify that file, feel free to call Daryl or Alex and they'll work with you. But hopefully that's enough information for you to do that. So if this was from the old system, the alpha files, as we're calling them, you can just click there and hit delete, and you can do it on your own. You don't have to call us to do it. Okay, did that answer Dave's question? Steve Marshall, do we have to request access to the transparency to appear? So if you had an existing Auditor reporting system login previous to the new transparency system, you did not need to request it. It was given to you automatically. But if you do need to do that from the state reporting site, you just go up here to the gear and hit request for access. And then if this was not already checked, you can check these boxes and click here. So that's a good question. Obviously, not everybody had a reporting system website, but we tried through a direct email to all those users to do that. So Danny and Mark both said it's not showing up for me. Seth, can you help me? I'm not sure what they're referring to. Is it the polling question?
Yeah, those ones popped in when we were doing the polling question. And I think you'll just have to message Kim so that she knows that you were there, and she'll still work through making sure you get credit for being here and awake and paying attention. So.
Okay, let's clear those off. Okay, good questions, guys. Keep them coming. We'd much rather answer your questions than listen to ourselves talk about things we already know. We're here for you guys. Spencer says, referring to the fraud risk assessment, is the basic separation of duties checklist submitted with the fraud risk assessment?
So of the ones that have been submitted, some have included that and some have not included that. We're requiring the 1-page deal if you've already submitted it, you've included the basic separation of duties as well, we're not going to have a problem with that. We just don't want all of the policies and everything else, because in a lot of cases it'd be basically uploading your employee handbook. We don't want that many. We don't have room on our storage system for that kind of documentation, but the difference between 1 and 3 pages, we're okay. You can give it to us. We'll keep it if you give it to us. Otherwise, we just need the first page.
Cool. Okay, so that's the reporting system and the new transparent upload site. I want to show you, if we have time, which we're running out of time here, I did want to show you the public-facing side and how the transparency data is available a little bit differently than the other site. But for now, where's our... Go to the YouTube site and make sure you are familiar with that. So this, if you're not already a subscriber, go ahead and subscribe. 54 brave souls have subscribed to our YouTube site already. We think that they're helpful, so please subscribe. So a list of all of our videos, which Calvin Bergman on our team has really, we think, made short and concise videos, and we're happy with the work that he's done there. And he keeps cranking them out pretty quick and efficiently. And so we now have almost 20, and we get quite a few views. So for any of those of you that were not familiar with our YouTube site, hopefully you'll use that. The name of it, which you can link from our resource center, but you could search Utah Office of the State Auditor, Local Government Division. So the more frequent ones, we have what I just showed, a demo, 4-minute demo of how to create an account and upload to the new Transparent Utah site, upload site. We have Seth's beautiful summary of the Gatsby 87 lease standard that has been delayed, but this is a good run through that helps you understand if it applies to you, and some resources on how to do that. So you can watch that anytime you want. For those that are getting CARES Act funding from the state, which is those that are not in Utah or Salt Lake counties that need to use transparency reporting for your CARES Act reporting, we've provided some tutorials on how to, if you don't want to add new chart of account codes to your GL and you just want to alter the existing ones after you export your transparency file, we have 2 tutorials here, one how to do it in Notepad and one how to do it in Excel. So those are both available for those that will need that. And we also have a step-by-step instruction on the Resource Center for a paper copy of that. So we've recorded the content for this training. Seth did the SCAG update, 35 minutes, and my annual update here, local government update, 26 minutes. So those are the long version of what Seth summarized earlier. And if you haven't already seen that, we'd encourage you to go and view those. So these are the individual videos, which you can see the older ones there as well. And a lot of those would be more for your board members and your new staff, perhaps. But I wanted to draw your attention to our playlists, and this organizes groups of those videos. So our basic financial reporting, this is also if you have new staff or many of our non-accountant volunteers in smaller organizations. We put together this playlist that just explains the basics, the financial reporting, how to fill out a budget form, a small financial survey form, how to create accounts with the reporting system. So that's all, that list of those are in a playlist. We also have, for the training that we did, we put it in a playlist called the Local Government Update 2020, and it contains my update video, Seth's update video, and then also the uploading the auditor independence flow on how to do that. So all that in about an hour, and those are organized in playlists. We did want to encourage you for, if you have new staff that come in and if they're going to be responsible for any of the financial reporting or submission, this financial reporting basics, we also have that on our training site where there's questions and a certificate available if you want to have them do that and produce the certificate as evidence that they were able to answer the questions correctly and everything. That's available on the Thinkific based training website as well. Yeah, so those are our videos and our YouTube site. I think that was everything I wanted to show there. So we have about 15 minutes left. Keep the questions coming if you have specific questions. I wanted to go to the new Transparent Utah site. So this looks similar. We had kind of two in December when we launched the new site. There was kind of one, the old way for local government and non-state government entities. And then the state government got a fresh new look. So now everything has been put onto this newer look. And the way that people use the site by looking at the historical information, the way people use it is they want to know how much their neighbors that work for government make. So that's the most popular thing. So you can just that's our first default search. If you went in and put a keyword search, without even hitting anything, it just automatically gives you suggestions based on that criteria. So what we've provided is both the job description and the entity that they work for. So if it's Scott Jones that works for American Academy of Innovation, no, it's Scott Jones at Weber County. I can see that before I click through and get the results of that query. The default will give you in a graph bar chart, pretty basic stuff, distinguishing between wages and benefits for all the years available. And then this is more of a grid format that breaks out wages, benefits, and total compensation. And this feature allows you to export that data to a CSV file. So if you want to do that, that's the default search. There's also a global vendor search. So if you wanted to do, I'm looking for Rocky Mountain Power or Rocky Mountain Turf. I can scroll down here, lots of variations. Obviously, it's going to be a popular vendor name, but I can scroll through here. Maybe I can see I just need to be more specific to maybe want to see what governments are paying Netflix. So I can, if I just hit search or enter based on that, it'll pull up every instance in that thing, and the bar chart shows me total dollars by year, and then each of these is a different entity, and then down below is a table. So fiscal year, payee, payer, so who's the entity that's paying Netflix and the amount for the year. And then again, I can export to a CSV file that information. So those are the two searches, employee search, vendor search. And again, this is across state, all local governments, all state into one master search. So if somebody has worked for the state and a local government or for multiple local governments, if the name is reported by those two local governments the exact same, you'd be able to see that like a shared employee or like a substitute teacher, for example. If they substitute teach for Salt Lake School District, but also Canyon School District, you could see, how much they earned through this search, this master search. So it's pretty powerful, and we think people that want that information will be happy with how easy it is to get, instead of drilling down by year and by entity specifically. Highest paid employee, highest paid vendor, those are popular searches. On each of those, the default is to the state of Utah, but it's a little bit of a more familiar. Let's look at 2019. So if you see this plus button, that means you can expand, and I can just choose a single entity or all counties. Same
I
with
think that
cities.
way, if you're looking at that and you're a fourth class county, or whatever class of city you are, and you want to compare you to them, then you can just pick the ones out of your class. That way you get more comparable results.
Yeah, we know Weber and Davis, they're neighbors and similar, second class counties. So I can submit a search for highest paid employees for this single year between those two, and it tells me who those rich people are. Probably attorneys. So there's that's highest paid employee, and then highest paid vendor, similar functionality. So if I do all cities for 2018, so no surprise, construction companies. So single payment, highest single payment, and then highest aggregate payment by year. So PEHP, UAMPS, Rocky Mountain Power, these things make sense. And then if you want to do an individual search, so you can put in an individual name, and then again by entity, or you can do all of them. You can search all of them, which is kind of a duplication of that other one. Or you can go down to category type. K-12 gets a lot of criticism, so you could do all K through 12 education entities, or you could just pick one or more. And again, if you do multiple entities, you have to do a single year, or you can do multiple years for a single entity. That's just a little bit of a somewhat of a limitation to that power search. So we have, and then a new thing that really is new to this system. So this shows all years for the state of Utah. So it's all revenue, all expense, and then the difference, which could either be a surplus or deficit by year. So we can, this is an interesting view. So if you do all counties, and again, I can only select a single year. So I'll do 2018 because we know that data is all in by now. So you can just see, just gives you a real sense of the dollars spent by counties. No surprise, Salt Lake County being the largest. So I can go into this and I can click off Salt Lake County and resubmit, and then it takes Salt Lake County out. So it's, the results aren't quite so skewed. And then I see, Utah County is the next largest, Davis, Cache, Weber. Again, these are no surprises, right? We know these are the larger entities, but you can get down to where, again, maybe I just want to compare Davis and Weber County. Revenues and expenses. And then surplus deficit is the net of those two numbers for those two entities. So it just allows for comparability. And so that's a new feature to the Transparency Utah site. Now this transaction detail, this mimics the what we call a legacy functionality, something that the way you could get to the information in the past. So this is run through a Google web tool called Data Studio. And it's not supposed to take this long to come up, but just
well, one of the things while that's coming up that I wanted to mention, you know, a lot of people know that I worked with local government in a county, and one year we had truth and taxation coming up, and we were trying to put together a graph of saying, okay, why do we need to do truth and taxation this year? Well, if you're in that situation, this provides you a pretty good tool. You can pull up your entity and you run it for, 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18. And if each of those years shows, well, we ran a deficit in 17 and a deficit in 18 and a deficit in 19, and now we're doing truth and taxation in 2020, and we're asking for this amount of money, it will help through an automated way of being able to create a report, create a thing that anybody can go and duplicate and check for themselves in case they don't trust your numbers, to be able to say, hey, this is why. It's because we've ran these deficits for this many years. And it helps have a uniform way of telling the story so that people can find that same information. So I look at that and say, you know what, this is a good tool. I really wish we would have had it back when I was in that situation. So,
well, and I think this, Seth, and I'll just show the one that was probably the most high profile, was Utah County ran a deficit for multiple years, and we're trying to make the argument to do tax increase to their organization and to their voters. And so, yeah, so you're able to quickly see Utah County, just give me total profit and loss for everything. So you can see, how that, and again, this is based on the information that's in the Transparent Utah database. This is not CAFR information. This is not financial information that's been audited. It's just the aggregation of what's in the system. But these types of visualizations tend to be easier to explain than a bunch of numbers and tables of numbers. So these simple bar charts make it a little bit easier to digest, I guess. So I don't know what's going on with Data Studio, but no training can go off without some hiccups. So maybe this is our hiccup for the day. So we were going to go to 11:15, I believe. So I can show a few other features. Looks like we do have another question. So does the surplus or deficit report combine all funds for the entities? Yes. So it is the total, all the revenue, all the numbers that are classified as revenue are totaled up for each fund, each entity for each year, and then all expenditures. So it doesn't differentiate between fund types. It's just the total for the entity, which, again, more sophisticated people understand there's a lot of nuance to what that means. So we hope to be able to make these tools more sophisticated, and by using the Uniform Chart of Account codes to show different funds and whatnot will allow that information to become more nuanced and sophisticated. So we'd love suggestions that you would have on how to do that.
okay, and we've got that last polling question just popped up, so make sure you get that in before we wrap up.
So since we've got just a couple more minutes, we do have, where does the money go? Where does the money come from? So this is a way to show let's see. So I want to do a single year. I'll do 2018, again, for all counties. Okay, yeah, so this is the question we had before. Where does the money come from? This obviously just shows revenues, but it breaks it up by fund type. or by category. I think it's maybe it's function code, not fund code, but function code. So different categorizations by the function code of the total revenue for each county. Let's get rid of Salt Lake. If anybody's tuned in from Salt Lake County, hopefully you're not offended that we're getting you out of there, but the numbers are just kind of an outlier. So this, yeah, breaks it up by the function type. So you can kind of see a little bit, and I can get rid of, by clicking here, I can get rid of the different types. So if I wanted to, I guess, isolate just taxes, tax revenue, get rid of everything else, and all that's left is taxes. So it is a little bit dynamic, and again, this isn't obviously a super polished finished product, but it was the development that we got in the time that we had before we had to switch over from those legacy providers. And I think it's better. I hope you think it's better, and we're always looking to improve the system. So suggestions are,
Okay, so
Matt
Jeremy,
asked if they're exportable. I don't know on the charts. Let's see. No, there is not export. So I guess you'd have to just save your screen or save the screenshot. But that's something that we could look into, how we could export that visual. So that's a good question. Okay, well, I've got 13 minutes after the hour. We're pretty close there. Kimberly, I don't know if there's any last things. We can send it back to you to close it out.
On behalf of the UGFOA board, I want to thank Jeremy and Seth for putting this presentation together, and everyone who participated today. We look forward to having you join us at next week's webinar for a legislative update that will be presented by the Utah League of Cities and Towns. And as a reminder, please complete the post-webinar survey for your CPE credit and to provide us with your valued feedback. The link to this recording and the corresponding slides will be available on the UGFOA.org website by next week. So thanks everyone, and we hope to see you soon.